I was referring this document, right, for Spring Boot. You have so many good examples here and tutorials point Java to S. Uh, for each topic, you can refer multiple blogs and see their opinions also. Now coming to this document, right, Spring IO. So let's go through this document and see what they are saying. Spring startup failures. Spring Boot usually will not wait till users request for the configurations failures or any failures in the system, objects creation or dependency injection. It checks and it populates the errors during the startup itself. So it will start application eagerly, like how application context will start, right? So as soon as it start application, all the objects will be created. If there are any issues, it will report. So why it will start means the lazy initialization is by default it is false. So as well as you start your application, all objects are created. In case if you don't want it, you can configure it lazy initialization to true. So I mean false. So during application startup, it will not create any objects. If you see the same application, hello, here we have DAO, controllers, service classes, and by default, this configuration is, yeah, by default, the default configuration is false for it. Spring main need to do lazy initialization or eager initialization. So if you can fit false, by default it is eager instantiation. For eager instantiation, you can configure it. So this is default. Default eager or early objects creation. Default loading time initialization security. In case if you don't want, make it true. So objects will not created during loading time. So if you run it, yeah, student controller object, controller mapping created, and where is your business class and DAO class and configurations. I think it will skip remaining part. Let me put one more class here and restart it. Test config and let me put one more class test component. With all stereotypes, I'm adding all stereotype classes here, and will your container create all stereotype objects or not? You can see. Okay, we have component class, configuration class, DAO class, controller class, business class. So as soon as I start, at the rate Spring Boot application will load all the classes from this com package. Under com, if you have whatever classes, it will scan all the classes and it will create objects. So now, just let me start my application. Just let me start my application main method. So component scanning is performing here to create your objects. 63636 is not available. True. 633. Huh? It should be available, right? I think it is already running. See this banner color came. I think after restart it is working. The banner we applied, right? Rainbow with the colors. That is also coming. So let me shut down everything and start it. So my main method getting started. Server is started, Tomcat, but no objects created it. Your application classes. No application classes objects created. It is doing lazy loading. Until unless you request for a class, it is not creating it. Like a bean factory do, right? Yeah. No, actually I called it. Intentionally we called it to see, we called it here, right? That's why it created. Otherwise it is not creating anything. Until unless you call for it, it don't create. Here I can call. Like how you will call from context if it don't get bean. Earlier we have the two lines here, right? Controller 1, controller 2, we called it. So as I called it, it created. Until unless you call it, it will never create. Okay. Now, have you remembered that Bean Factory how it is creating object while loading time or when you Bean Factory application context lazy loading, eager loading. Do you remember? When you use Bean Factory, yeah, yeah, Bean Factory. When you use Bean Factory like application context, right? Bean Factory equal to new class XML Bean Factory, and when we loaded XML file, when we use application context and loading XML file is different. Class path XML application context. No, 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 nothing like that. This is core container we call. See, basically during their design, they started with Bean Factory. Usually, we never use it. Okay, first version they started with this Bean Factory, and they realized they need some more advanced features, and they created class application context. So usually we use this one only, J2EE. J2EE, which is having all the features, annotations and all. Whereas in core, it is not designed for annotations and all the heavy features. So the basic container, main factor, just to create objects and perform basic dependency injections. So when you use core bean factor, right, it is lazy container. When you load XML, it will not create objects. On load, no object created until unless you call. Until you call factory dot get bean of your class. You guys remember it? We pass our class ID here, then it will create object. Until you call. Until you call, it will not create object. Whereas J2EE, during loading time only, it will create objects. During loading time only, it will create object. By default, this is eager container. During loading only, it used to create objects. It used to create object. Here, this one also eager container only. By default, Spring application dot run will create objects during loading time only. But why it is stopping? As you mentioned this lazy initialization to true, it will stop that object's creation. It will never create until you request like factory.getB. It will not create any object. Until you request, it will not create any object. So your application objects are your application classes you created. But until unless user request, it will not create any object. User need to call factory.getB method. But usually in MVC application, why end user will come and call factory.getBin method? He never. End user will always call controller classes methods. So when end user try to call this hello method, what is the code it is running? Okay, let me start. Okay, server is started in 63636 localhost 63636 slash hello. User called a controller class hello, then hello given response. Before giving response, if you see your controller object must be created. Your controller object is created here because you called it. Until unless you call it will not create objects. Now what about other classes? Usually when you configure other classes as a dependencies here, let's say my controller needs a business dependency. So if I configure that student business dependency here with auto while, then this object also as you needed right on demand. You needed this for this class. As soon as user requested for this hello, that means controller object is required for user, controller object is required business. So business object also it will create. Okay. Hmm. I'll tell you. For this one we had a discussion. Let me explain. So now I'm calling my controller again. So my controller object created followed by business object. Business object also dependency for me. So business object also created. If my business is having dependencies of DAO, I have student to DAO and I need configurations also. So at the rate auto while test configuration, test component, and just auto while. So now all classes are somehow connected to each other. All classes somehow connected to each other. Controller connected with business, business connected with DAO, DAO connected with other two classes. So when user request for controller, controller will call business, business will call DAO, DAO will call other two component and configuration classes. So server is started. You can auto-wire config, but usually config auto-wiring is not required. Config inside you will have beans, right? You can inject that beans, but nothing wrong. If you auto-wire somewhere config, that is not harm. You can, no issues with that. But usually config it will have beans. Beans we auto-wire. As my config is simple test class, I don't have beans. That's why I auto-wired it, just to make you how this config object is created. Otherwise, inside config, if you have some bean, if you configure that bean as auto-word, then also config will create. Either way, okay. Now all my classes connected together: controller, business, DAO, component, config, on demand. So now, Dheeraj, you are saying on demand is good, right? Why you are creating unnecessarily at the during starting of application itself? So let me hit one more time this hello. One, two, three, four, five. Okay. Is it creating new objects? No, right? Same object only there. Now tell me, is it not wasting the memory? First time Dheeraj called and nobody called for next 10 days. Isn't your object there in RAM, JVM? Hmm. In both the cases, object is there. Then what you are saving from from what you are saving your application? Getting right my point. And one more benefit during loading time itself, if I have, let's see this scenario. Okay, one more scenario I'll give you. Inside the configuration class, let it be, sorry, public. Hmm. No, 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 no. If you do that, then that will become prototype. Let's say concurrent users. I was telling yesterday, right? I was checking this image on Big Billion Day, something they started. Amazon Big Billion Day concurrent. For Flipkart, they get 1.6 million concurrent requests getting for every minute, they said. So you are saying 1.6 million, 16 lakhs times your objects need to create it and die, create and die. Do you really need to do that? So this object 16 lakhs times, if you imagine 16 lakhs times per second if it creates, definitely your RAM will burn. Okay, you will get fire from your machine. If your server really allows to create then that many, means it will go out of memory. Generally, no issues will happen physically. It will go out of memory. One object is sufficient. One object of your class is sufficient for any number of users. Let it will be millions or crores requests you can get. Your application never say out of memory. Yeah, singletons, correct. So what I'm saying, either during application startup you create them or lazily you create them. They will be created and they will stay for until you shut down. Until you shut down your application, the classes will be there in your memory. So my recommendation is create that objects during loading time. Don't use this lazy do too. Why? Because let's say if somewhere in your configurations you have a problem, somewhere in your configurations you have a problem here. Let's see. So you know, right, this line what it can do? Yeah, that can create error. So, but during coding time, I never realized that will give error. During coding time, I never realized it. That can produce error. So innocently, I used that class here. I auto-void it, and my lazy initialization is true in my application. So I'm starting my application. There is a problem in my bean configurations. Do you see any error during startup? Inside bean there is no, inside beans there is an issue, but during application startup it never said. Okay, my application is having good business, good revenue. So I started this application and I said all to my clients, hit my application. Now first client came who is ready to invest. He came and he hit it. Okay, he is ready to invest. Yeah, he is ready to give a contract to me like 1 crore. He see white label error page. Will it make any sense? Right? So it's good always encounter the issues also. Let's create all your objects ahead, very ahead before users coming in. At least you will be realizing, right, as a developer or being in a production area, you will be knowing that okay, my application is having a problem. I need to immediately report it to my developer. He can verify before saying the production is ready to use. Now I started by making it false. Now see, your application itself is not started. Then production team may call you and say, hey man, there is a problem in your code. Verify it. See the log. So then you will be realizing it, okay, there is some exception in my class. I should avoid it. You'll be going into your configuration class and you will realize, okay, definitely this will give an exception. Maybe something you need to have here. Error handling you will have here. So you will be putting proper error handling and you may start. Now, though you have error exception also, it will not terminate your application. You need to handle this error or you need to remove this code. Now, again, when you move your code to Git and say deploy it, now production people will, if it have a errors, exceptions will come at runtime. It even don't know why. I mean, what master class? Inner class. We can have inside one class. We can have other class. No issue. I have this class here and I am using that class object. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Okay, one class can have child classes, but in object-oriented concept, we never put one object inside another object. We usually follow these rules, right? Solid rules, single responsibility. So each one class should have one class only. That means one class inside no other class. But Java will allow you to write. You can write if you want. Okay. Usually, I never write them in my use cases. If at all required, you can write. It will create test bean. This class bean is created already. That bean it will auto-wire here. Wherever you auto-wire it, right? That will auto-wire here. Test bean also will be created. If you want to see, right? SOP statement. This bean also will be created. This bean also singleton. Exact. When you see at the rate bean, just imagine your XML concept. That's it. Anywhere you can inject it. I injected it into DAO. Your beans are ready to inject anywhere. That bean can be a controller. That bean you can inject into controller service, DAO, config, anywhere. Okay. Yeah. Config class. Exactly. Exactly. So always beans should be part of configuration. Bean object creation configuration is like your XML file. Bean is like a bean tag. Yeah. Huh. No, 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 no. Just to quickly write, I written here. If you don't want that, you may create it as a separate class. Both are same. Okay. But keeping it here. Uh, okay. Anyway, this it will make it available via auto wiring, right? If it is inside it also, during runtime it never bother about your classes. Object is required, right? Object is auto wiring, so it will sustain. So you are saying how we can call the methods? Maybe you can try that. Will these methods of this test class will it enable to call from outside or not? That may be your question, right? Keeping class here or outside doesn't show any difference. Okay. Maybe if you are curious whether I can able to call the methods which I have here, you can try. Just like that. Usually we do that. DMOs into service, services into controllers. Mhm. Acha. Configurations are not hard coded. You are saying it is coming from somewhere else. Okay, that's how they written. We never write that way. Usually, I will be writing such configurations into config servers. We maintain config server concept. That is simple approach. One service to another service calling. They configured properties in other application. From there, they are getting it. No, no, I got it. So the REST template, yes, you need REST template. Yeah, you create here. You create here. So that is not might be a requirement. You might understand it differently. Why this REST template need to start before application? If it is part of application, it will create along with application. If it is outside the application, you need to create outside the application. That is nothing to do with your application, right? If it is, I got you. Yeah, I got you. You need the database credentials. For that reason, you need this template. Let's put it here. You create a public void data source something create ds. So here you may call it create object. This method, it will bring REST template for you here. Whatever configurations you are getting here, you might connect here REST template or post. You can connect with that entity here. Blah 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 URL. From there you get the data. Got it? So this will be created before this data source being. So all your connections will be available to this data source being before in time. Yeah. We will see, Prakash. I understand your requirement. That's not a difficult thing. Okay. So, in an order, if you write whatever dependency you want, you create it first and call it from the other bean. One bean can use other bean. The same thing that we did in dependency injection, right? Service needs DAO, DAO needs connections. You are saying connection needs REST template. Let's create it. That is what your dependency chain. Okay. So yeah, we just talked here only, right? Yeah. So what we concluded is Spring lazy initialization always keep it false. It will keep by default initialization during loading time only. So the loading time initialization is always good rather than doing initializations at the time of first user request. Okay, even at first user request or loading time, it cannot avoid creating all your objects. It cannot avoid creating all your objects, whichever you have here. So then why you unnecessarily encounter the issues during runtime at first user request? If there are any problems, let's find out the problems during deployment only. So you would be, in a position to identify if there is so and so problems in your code, you can fix them. Okay, so always I recommend it to use eager initialization only. Let it take time. It may not take much time to do the initializations. Maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes depends on the application size. Let it finish that initialization phase, create all the objects, and verify your log on the production day, and you will get the confidence by looking into all your log. There is no exception. Then you can realize, okay, my code is perfect. Then at least one round of testing, you will go and see the launching page whether that is working fine or not. Or you may ask your production team just to verify production team just to verify all the main landing pages what they have. So they will verify and say, okay, everything is going good. Then you can send the mail or communication to the parties to whomever you want to share, saying that your application is ready for use. Okay, so don't make it to use it for false only. This is by default. You need not to configure it. Okay. So that is just for lazy initialization. And that is what they are saying, startup failure. If there are any issues during startup itself, you are getting like 8080 port is already reserved, it will say already port is reserved. And pings also eagerly it will create. So if there are any issues with your pings also it will report. So by default it is a eager container. And customizing banner, we learned it. How to put a simple banner dot file we can put with colors and all we can code, right? And customizing Spring application. So yes, this is simple configuration class. They are writing and loading it into Spring application class instead of run. So this is how also you can start Spring application class. You run manually by creating application class object. Okay, let's see. So here we are using Spring application. This is the container class which is starting, right? Spring application. This is what internally starting your Tomcat and IOC both, right? So this class you can write in this way also. Main method. You can create Spring application object just by loading your class, just by loading your class here, and arguments you can pass through. Both are same only. Just create object with this and pass arguments in later next step. Okay. Both are legal only. You can use this or this. Usually we never customize it in case any customization is required, you may do this way as well. So what it will return if you use a run method, when run method calls, right, it will return your application context object. Something like in your core practices you see, right? IOC object you can get. And if you want to do any introspections or if you want to get an object and see something here, you can get it. Otherwise not required. Maybe for testing purpose you can use this. Otherwise you need not even write this. In case of some testing if you want to do, if you want to get your beans and play with them here, you can use this. Otherwise, end-to-end operations will be happen from UI itself. From UI, customer will call, then that will go to service DAOs. The flow will go from UI to backend. Okay. So nothing much here. Event builder, the same thing. Spring application builder class also we can use for the same purpose like Spring application. Nothing much adds here. Live state to check the application health or availability. Command runner classes. We'll see this later. Okay. Yeah. Now I want to show you here about the container. By default, it is starting Spring container. Okay. So I don't want that container. If you say I don't want that default to start at Spring container, by default it is starting Tomcat. I don't want Tomcat. So what you can do here, you can exclude it. By default, the starter, right? Spring Web starter given Tomcat. If you highlight here, it is showing. It will be showing what are all default it will provide. It is not giving. Okay. Okay. So usually Spring Web dependency, right? Spring Boot starter web dependency will have embedded container by default. So if you want to exclude that container here, you can exclude it by using exclude options, right? So one starter is having so many dependencies it have internally. So if you want to avoid the dependencies, right? Spring Web is having Tomcat dependency, embedded Tomcat. So if you don't want, you can remove that Tomcat dependency here just by excluding it. Under exclusions, you need to mention which you want to exclude. Exclude artifact ID and your group ID. So keep your Tomcat dependencies here. So the by default Spring Boot startup Tomcat is available, so the Tomcat it will exclude. That means Tomcat is not available. If you start, it will not start Tomcat. Student DO object created, component object created, test config object created. Just a minute. Just a minute. Cancelling refresh attempt, DO object unsatisfied dependencies, no qualifying bean type of config test expected, something not getting. But usually there is no container for you. When you exclude it, no container. There is no container given because you excluded it. To run your application, there is no container class. Exception during initialization calling refresh. Do you only test plus test config? That could not be found. Yeah. I don't know why it is throwing that method. Acha, beans we commented about. I disturbed it actually. Let me public test test bean. Okay. So all these objects created started hello application. It started but no container. No container, no port number, nothing. Because we excluded it. On place of exclusion, yeah. I was here, correct. Tomcat is not creating, na? Tomcat is not creating. Mhm. Yeah. Usually, so when there is no Tomcat, it will run it in standalone mode. Okay. When there is a Tomcat, it will run it in web mode. When there is a Tomcat, it will run it in a web mode. You know in web MVC, right? Who created your IOC object? Is it Tomcat or is it dispatcher servlet? Right? So Tomcat created dispatcher servlet, dispatcher created your IOC. Now no Tomcat, no dispatcher here. It will run it in a standalone mode. By default, your IOC will start. As you are using main method and loading Spring Boot application, it will load all your classes as usual, like how you returned in the standalone application, right? Same way. When you enable Tomcat, then it will get to know that you need web. So it will load WebJar file there and it will start it in web mode. And it will make it available this IOC object to dispatcher servlet when you start in web mode. Now it is in standalone mode only. When no Tomcat, it runs in standalone. Yeah. So now the default Tomcat I excluded. In place of this Tomcat, there are two more servers, 100 Tau and Jetty. Those also open sources. You can configure them. Okay, they are similar to Tomcat. You may explore. Okay, you may explore more about the Jetty and 100 Tau, but they are similar to Tomcat web servers only. So now if I configure Jetty here, let it complete build. Jetty dependencies getting downloaded almost. Yeah. Just a minute. Okay, I think I can use this. Now I excluded Tomcat and added Jetty here. So when other web container is available in the context, so then now it will run it in web mode. Start your application and see here. All your IOC objects are created and in web mode it is starting now. Now you can see dispatcher service object is created. So before dispatcher itself, it is creating all your components. Something like your core practice, how we did application context AP equal to new class path XML application context of XML. It loaded all your classes before dispatcher servlet itself initialized. Now dispatcher servlet will be getting this context object. This context object it will make it available to dispatcher servlet. So dispatcher servlet will use your context IOC object for the backend classes. Backend classes need to be exchanged via dispatcher servlet only. Front end request for front end request, right? Dispatcher servlet is mandatory. All requests will come to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will take it forward to controller, business, then blah, blah, blah. So now application is started in Jetty. Earlier application started in embedded Tomcat. Now it is started in embedded Jetty server. The behavior will be same. Undertow. Undertow. Let me see undertow dependency. String starter undertow. Yeah, Spring Boot starter undertow only. Just mention it. I think it's struct. Okay. Go to form file. Just comment this dependency. Without version, let's see. Spring starter version only it might take. Same starter as we are using. So undertow getting downloaded. Let's start your application. Earlier it is in Jetty. Now if I start, now web server is started in undertow web server. Undertow, undertow web server in same port. Please read through them, okay? The major differences I'm not sure. I thought of reading them, okay? Yeah, I'll tell you if I find some document. But these three options you have from Spring Starter itself. From Spring itself, they all are available, okay? So which all artifacts are starting with the Spring Boot, right? They are all from Spring Boot only. So I can see Jetty also from Spring Boot only. Spring Boot itself providing it. This is not third party. Third party names may be different names. It will start. So all these dependencies we have by default they choose the Tomcat. I think uh, they are saying. right? Indirectly, Tomcat itself is good. That's why they included it as a default Tomcat. Okay. So if you have simple server, simple Linux with simple database, you can use Spring application for the web projects or for REST-based projects. You need not to include any Tomcat. You need not to download Tomcat. That stuff not required. Just Java software and database is sufficient. On top of Java, directly you can run your application. So just you can bring your library jar file after build, right? It will be generating one jar. You can directly run that jar file anywhere. Just after build, right? Jar files will be created. Let it finish. Just this is the command, Java command you write, Java hyphen jar, then your jar file you can. So as soon as build success, you can see a jar that is created. So you can directly run it. You can copy this jar into your Linux or any server. You can copy it there and access that service location. Give this command java hyphen jar jar. So your server is getting started here. So your objects are created and under our server is started. As usual, you can request it. It is working. Okay. So any web server you can use. By default, let's just go with Tomcat only. In case explicitly, if there is any requirement to change it, change it. If you find any other third parties also, I think you can try it by including their servers. Is it clear? Tomorrow we will see profiles concept. Okay. Yeah, profiles in terms of development, and somebody asked, right, profiles from a form file, dependencies area profiles also. I'll just read about it and come. We will see. I'm not sure about it, but yeah, yeah. That is not a big thing. If you want, you can use in a minute job. Actuator, dev tools. Yeah, we will. Basically, in Spring Boot, they don't. Yeah, in Spring Boot, they don't add you anything. In microservices, if we add them, right, you can see, realize it. What is the real need of it? Actuator or dev tools. So you can add actuators. Hmm. Yeah. That we do, right? We are on the way to discuss, many things. Yeah, just yeah. Got it. That is what we are going to discuss, right? That is what profiles will bring configurations also for you. Okay, local configurations via profiles, right? What are the profiles? Why we need, and from where else we can configure them. local configurations. You can configure them from config clients, config server, config clients you can use. External configurations also you can use. During configuring it local, we can maintain it in different ways, properties or YML files. In many ways we do that. That will I'll show you tomorrow step by step. Okay. And how to use profile for your application. Before this, I just want to before profiles itself. My configurations we can pass. Okay, we'll see them. So we'll use basically config server. So configurations you can pass like this. Uh, Command line and that's we will see. Yeah, don't get confused. We'll see profiles first. Yeah. Okay. So if your application is simple standalone application, obviously, if it is a standalone, why you need web itself? Standalone, which is running in machine. I have calculator which is standalone. For this calculator, do you think web is required? No, no. My question is, this application I want to build using Spring calculator. Do I need web dispatches servlet and all? Do I need or not required? Which is running in single machine. Not required, right? Not required. So now for standalone, when I say standalone application is required, web dependency itself is not required actually. You need not to add web dependency there. Spring Starter Web we added. So if I don't add Starter Web for my standalone, then you need not to worry about web itself. Your application will start it in standalone mode only. IOC only will start. Now, yeah. Coming to web, when you add web, you need dispatches. When you add web, right, the default dispatches are like all the configurations as we have done right before web.xml dispatches are lit. That all pre-configurations are available in web dependency. All these pre-configurations are available in Spring Starter web dependency. As soon as you include this web dependency, it will start your dispatcher servlet. And already IOC is getting started. This IOC will be available in this dispatcher context. Dispatcher now it will able to access your IOC when you start there. In servlets, that is in its MVC part. Now it is Spring Boot. Hmm. No, no, no. True. What I am saying is that is in MVC, not in boot. That is true in MVC, not in boot. Got it? See, we can do objects creation in many ways. You can do it in servlet, you can do it in filter, you can do it in listener. And if the same object, if you want to make it available to the next servlets, next listeners, via the context object, servlet context will carry that object anyway. What I am thinking is this object is making available to dispatcher servlet via context. but it is quite different from MVC to here. Okay, in MVC directly dispatcher servlet is connecting with IOC, directly dealing with. Now here it is keeping this IOC into the context. This context dispatcher servlet is accessing. That clearly I can see. Via context dispatcher servlet is getting. Context. May yes, servlet's context only. That is what I'm saying. Servlet's context only. In servlets, yeah, yeah. In servlets, that is beautiful concept actually. If you come with the servlets, full servlets knowledge, right? Internal mechanism easily we can understand. Yeah, sure. For this batch also, right? I'm going to conduct a full batch session. I'm working on the content part. Maybe one full day session I need it. I'll tell you there what is context and what is config, what is servlet filter listener. Hardly one day session is sufficient. But in servlets, context is an object where it will make it available things for all the servlets, a common global object. In this global object, IOC context must be available. So dispatcher service get it. But don't confuse with it. You need not to think about it. When you don't have web dependency, IOC only starting. When you have web dependency, then imagine that dispatcher servlet is starting with IOC. I mean Tomcat is starting with IOC. Tomcat. So Tomcat is starting, including your IOC server. Tomcat server, IOC server. Both will start. If no web, only IOC will start. To to add different web servers, you can go here and exclude your Tomcat and add the other servers dependencies here. Spring providing these three, Jetty under on Tomcat only, so you can add them via Spring status. Yes, of course. This one also again one more class for iOS. So by default, Spring Boot application itself is a configuration class. We learned about configuration, right? Spring Boot application itself again is a configuration. All the configurations I have here. So here you can code. I was telling right in the beginning while discussing about configuration concept. So there are two places that your beans can be initialized, either in configuration or Spring Boot application. If you observe in few applications, people used to put configurations here in Spring Boot application also. The reason is Spring Boot application itself is a by default configuration class. No. Of course, this is a configuration class. It should create. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So if you have doubt, just keep one more thing here. Itself is a configuration, right? This object will be created. And inside this class, you can do configurations also. Okay. Public test. Okay, that is inside there. Right? Something class ABC. You can create this bean also here. Component will have least priority. Least in terms, component can be created based on its dependency, wherever it required. Okay. If service is required, it after service it will create. If controller is required, after controller it will create. So create Just a minute, just a minute. Let me show this. Okay. Let me finish it. Now you can see it will be creating this object as well as ABC object both. See, ABC object is creating and your hello world application object also created. Just a minute, just a minute. Yeah, for today you can leave.